Hey guys, this is Fozon, and in today's lesson we're going to be discussing traversing arrays. Traversal is just a fancy way of saying going through every element of our array. So our lesson objectives, we're going to learn the for each loop, we're going to learn how to traverse through an array with a for loop, which is a regular standard for loop, and then we're going to do the same with your standard while loop. That's the next section. Let's move on to the compiler. So in our compiler we have three arrays. We have an integer array with the values 5, 6, 7. We have a string array with the values hello, there, and friend. We also have a bank account array, and I've created a bank account within every single element. So at every single position, a bank account has been formed with the respective values. So the names of our bank accounts are Fozon, Umar, Vikram. So we've declared three values, three bank accounts to be more specific. And these are the name instance variables of each respective bank account. Let's first use the while loop to iterate through our arrays. So we have a while, and then within our while loop we're going to have our Boolean expression, and then that's our while loop curly brackets. When inside a while loop, we have to make sure that we have a loop control variable. So let's declare loop control variable. Integer I is equal to 0. We want the while loop to iterate the amount of times that we have within our array. So we want this to iterate 5, 6, 7. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have three iterations. We have three elements, so we want it to iterate 3 times. So as long as I is less than 3, it should iterate 3 times if we increment it at the end of every single loop. If this doesn't make sense, recall that we start at 0. So 0 is going to be the first loop. That's our first iteration. Then it's going to increment, and then 1 becomes our second iteration. And then finally, when I is equal to 2, that's going to be our third iteration. The reason why we have I set to equal to 0 is because it serves as a way of accessing elements within our each array. So let's access my integer, and then since we have a value that starts at position 0, then it's position 1, and then position 2, we can use the loop control variable as a way of accessing our array values. Let's put this in a print statement. And then let me put this within our print statement. And to make sure that all the elements are separated, I'm going to add a space. Hopefully this should work. And as you can see, our values are printed. Integer I is our loop control variable, and then as long as it's less than 3, it will iterate 3 times. It's not common practice to use 3 or an integer as the amount of times that we iterate through an array, because our array length is subject to change. So to encompass this, rather than using an integer, we use the .length feature of our array data type or reference type. So let's do my integer .length. My integer .length is just 3 because we have 3 elements. But say if we change the value, what happens? We have 4, and it will make that respective change. Now if this was 3, it would leave out the 4th value, as seen here. So we keep it as my integer .length. Now for loop is much more better, because rather than us putting the loop control variable outside the while loop, we have it done all in one expression. So let me erase this. For integer I is equal to 0, I is less than, and rather than putting 3, we put the same Boolean expression that we had before. So it's going to be my integer .length. We don't do less than or equal to my integer .length because this allows I to be set to 4. 4 would be a viable Boolean expression if we put less than or equal to 4. However, we don't have a position 4 within our array. Position 4, although there are 4 elements, recall that we start at position 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So there's no position 4 within our array. So we don't include the equal sign. We just have it set less than to the array length. And then after every iteration, we increment the array. We increment the loop control variable. Let's print out the element that it's at during each iteration. So let's do my integer, and then access it via the loop control variable. So rather than having an integer, we still have an integer, but rather than putting ourselves an integer, we put the loop control variable, because the loop control variable changes increments after each iteration, and it never goes over the number of elements or the greatest position that we have. Our greatest position is 3, but it doesn't go over because it knows that it has to be less than the length. It's not less than or equal to the length. Let's add the space to ensure that we have space between our elements. And we get the same result, 5, 6, 7, 4. Let's do this with strings. So all I'm going to do is replace this with my string. My strings, it's plural. And as you can see, we make the respective change. We have an exception because we have a myInteger.length. Let's replace that with myStrings.length. And as you can see, we no longer have that exception. The reason why that exception occurred is because we have 4 elements within our array. We have only 3 elements within our string array. So when it went for the final iteration, or the 4th time, there was no position 3 within our array. Therefore, it gave us an error. So make sure that the Boolean expression and the array length that you're using corresponds with the array length that you're printing, or the array element that you're printing. So I have myStrings.length used in my Boolean expression, and then I have myStrings being access. This will avoid any index array out of bounds error or exception. Now let's do the same with the counts. And keep in mind what actually is being printed out. So I replace it with my accounts, and I'm going to replace it with my accounts here. Let me temporarily remove the toString method. When we remove the toString method, it prints out the object location of each bank account. This is not practical for our use. So let's access the toString method. We override the toString method of the object class, and now it should print out the names. And as you can see, it prints out the names of each bank account. We could do this another way as well. Rather than making a toString method, we could use one of the accessor methods. We have an accessor method of getName. This will return the name. So rather than accessing it through the toString method, what we can do is we can put .getName. Recall that this is just another bank account. So if this is just another pointer to another bank account, that means we can access the methods of its respective class, and getName is part of it. And if we remove the toString method, we should have the same result. And as you can see, we still have the same result. Now let's do a for each loop. This makes the process of traversing through an array much more easier, and it's more practical because it's visually more appealing. In this array, you don't have to account for the length because the computer automatically does it for you. So it's for, and then our data type that we use within the array. So we do int, and then this is the identifier that we use to later access our value. So let me just put val. Val is just an identifier that you can use. This allows you to access the element of the array within our class. Within our for loop. Let me make sure to have these curly brackets. And then we have to tell the for loop what array that we're actually traversing through. So since our data type is an integer, let's traverse through the integer array. Now rather than having a loop control variable and accounting for the length of each array, you simply just access val. So system.out.println, actually let me omit the ln, and then access val. This is the for each loop, and it prints out 5, 6, 7, 4. There's no need for us to account for the length nor the iteration. We don't have to create a loop control variable. We simply create an integer, and that integer will serve as the value that we're traversing through, the iteration or the value that we're going through. And it goes through every single element automatically. The computer does it all in the back end. Let's do the same with the other values. So we have string, my strings. So let's replace the data type that we're traversing with string. And then the name of our class, or the name of our array. So we're traversing through the my strings array. We keep val the identifier. And this can be whatever value we want, but val is generally the easiest to have in this case. When we do that, it prints out hello there friend. As you can see, we only replaced 2 values within our for loop, or for each loop. We only replaced the data type and then the name of our array. And as you can see, it makes the respective changes to print out and traverse through our entire array. Now let's do it with a bank account, which is a little bit more different, but nonetheless very easy. So the data type that we have at each element is a bank account. It's a bank account object. So let me replace string with bank account. Each bank account will be referred to as val through each iteration. Let's replace my strings with my accounts. Let's see what it prints out. It prints out the location of each object. And the reason why it does this is because I removed the toString method that we overrode from the object class. So it's not accessing the toString method. I want you to remember that val is another bank account. It's the bank account that we're accessing through each iteration. So if this is a bank account, that means that we can access the methods within the bank account. And one of the methods that we can access is the getName method. So we could do val.getName. This will allow us to print out the names of each bank account, which would be more practical for our case. And as you can see, it makes the respective changes to our for each loop, and we did so in literally just 3 change of words. We changed our data type from string to bank account. We changed our array name, or the array that we're accessing or traversing through. And then we put the .getName method because val is ultimately a bank account, and it iterates it automatically. No need, again, I keep mentioning it, but for each loops make it so much more easier to traverse through an array. I hope you enjoyed this video on array traversal.